Where do we start?
Yeah, that is the question when you're sitting in the presence of greatness, synth greatness. I think there are some instruments that you really just have to take a step back and acknowledge that you are in the presence of such a historically and cultural significant piece of equipment. I mean, the Model D to me is the most recorded, heard, impactful, certainly monosynth in history. I mean, it's just been on so many recordings. It's defined the sound of an era, multiple eras in multiple different genres. You've heard it in film scores, and there's just a survival theory aspect to it where, it's been around for as long as it's been around, and we're sitting here talking about it in a modern context, being able to capture this instrument for even more usages and more, really getting into the soul of it and seeing what the context of this instrument is today in 2025. And, for me, it was sort of a long time coming. I mean, I've never owned a Model D before, and I've only been working with one in studio contexts. So to have this in my home for multiple months, really getting to know it, really getting inside of it, was almost like a spiritual experience for me. I mean, you just have to look at it and be like, this is so the antithesis of where we're heading. It's just things were done in a different way. With the creation of this instrument and all the lore and history that surrounds it. I mean, you can't help but just be inspired by looking at it, which is a very, very cool place to be if you're a sound designer or a musician, just taking in everything it has to offer visually before you even turn a knob, before you even hear what it sounds like. And then to be rewarded with the sonic gold that comes out of this thing is almost an afterthought. Like all of the hype and emotional stuff happens before you even start to work with it. And then when you get inside of it, it's like, wow, I understand. Like, the Church of Model D, I understand why these have sort of a religious aura to them. I mean, it is, as you've said many times, the Stradivarius of synthesizers. And to be able to really cover the gamut and try and get as many different sounds out of it as possible was just a total and pure joy. And if you said, Dan, I'm going to employ you for the rest of the year, just make as many Model D sounds as you can, I'd be like, great, I'll never get tired of it because it's just so expansive,
It's interesting to say that because I think like we were talking about the 545 earlier today, and the fact that you probably did capture most of its sonic identity.
Yeah.
Whereas with this one here, despite its somewhat simple surface, I want to say that yes, this is the deepest it's ever been done,
without a doubt. Yeah.
And probably without comparison as well.
Yeah.
But yet I have to acknowledge, to your point as well, like that if you did decide to sit for the remainder of the year and record, we probably could.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what I feel it's so beautiful about the library that you've recorded and made every patch for yourself and dialed it in is that I sense you as a musician and as a bass player extraordinaire.
Yeah.
That you connected with the instrument. I can feel that.
Oh yeah.
Like the bass patches, each one.
Yeah.
There's not one, because like I think a lot of times, but since you go through things and it's like, I don't like that. It's like I like that. I liked everything.
Yeah.
I really did. So that spoke to me. It's like, wow, like there's probably even more despite the depth.
Yeah, I found it was exponentially harder to create a bad sound on this than it was to create a good sound.
Yeah.
There was one day where I was just doing bass sounds and I was just loving everything. And I was like, how, is it me? And I was like, let me try to create a bad bass sound, like a really squelchy, nasty opposite of this synth. And it still was cool in its own context. And there's just, as you said, it's relatively simple. I mean, you have 3 oscillators, but they're the best sounding oscillators I think any mono synth has ever had. You have 1 filter with, a relatively simple envelope, but it's the Model D filter. And, it's just like, it's the best of the thing, so it's simple, but everything is so quality. And this is an early serial number unit. That's important to mention as well, because a lot of people feel, myself included, that the early oscillator boards have a little bit more warmth and grisliness to it. And I definitely discovered that as I was sampling it. And, it's just an amazing machine, and it feels alive. Like you feel like you're kind of working with the instrument. There are some certain quirks where it tells you what you need to do versus you telling it what it needs to do. And just kind of having that conversation and that dance with the knobs really, really was an inspiring process. And I had so much fun with it. And at a certain point, you have to kind of say, yeah, I have to stop here, or I could just keep going. But, in my mind, I thought of just about every musical context that I had heard it in. I thought about every musical context that I could use it in that I hadn't heard it in. And then I just tried to also let the instrument speak to me on a few of the patches, and really got into a couple unique tricks, kind of using the feedback loop trick where you take the output and put it into the external input to get even more grisliness to it. There's a fair amount in there that have either just a touch of that or have that as the focal point. But just messing with the slightest difference in the filter, the amount of contour, the filter emphasis, just little changes here and there, could give you a completely different sound. So the possibilities really are about as endless as it gets in terms of one single mono synth. But
yeah, and we've added a couple of extra Model Ds from other units as well to the library, so people can compare oscillators. But we decided that this was our favorite instrument in the process. And so I have a question for you. I want to try to challenge something. So in the past, we've talked about like the CS80, the RB2600, this guy here. How come that the first units in their category, one of the first, their first monosynth, CS80, the first polysynth, arguably the Prophet 5 for like more affordable. How come it's the first units that arguably were the most timeless?
I think because it's multifaceted. I think because when they came out, they were being used so often, and they were in the hands of incredible sound designers and musicians and film scorers. Our ear just kind of gravitated towards that thing being whatever the electronic and technological capabilities of the synth were at the time. That specific sound. Every little change on the backside of the synthesizer, from just the oscillator boards being different, or just, technology through hole versus surface mount, all these little technological innovations have sonic consequences. And I know consequence has a connotation to it, but, a sonic result. And so I think because of where it was at the time, combined with how prevalent those specific sounds became, our ears naturally just gravitated towards that being the reference point. And so I feel like earlier is, better because it got used in more of a capacity, and it's just become kind of a staple of certain genres. And I guess, the truth of the matter is, I think as things become smaller on a PCB level or become more modern, you are definitely removing some things that we gravitate towards. The instability of the older boards, like newer is not always better when it comes to synthesizers, certainly on a PCB board level. But I think it's mainly just because it's the sounds that we got used to, and we're always trying to return to those sounds and use those sounds in a modern context. So, I think, the synthesizer world is one where technological innovation is not always a better sonic result. And this machine is the ultimate example of that, I would say.
I turned it on yesterday, and I noticed slight flickering on the power thing. And for me, it was a reminder of like Moog. I remember his daughter told me like that he could always talk about like he could feel the electricity in the unit.
Yeah.
I do feel once that gets converted into zeros and ones, we lose something in the process. There's not one digital component in this unit.
Right, exactly. And everything we are providing in Soundpaint at the end of the day is a recording. It is a actual recording, an actual capture of this instrument sustaining a note. And go no further than just listening to the raw oscillators. Do feel that aliveness, right? You can really hear the electricity, which sounds kind of like a cuckoo crazy thing to say, but with the right speakers and just the right mentality, I feel you can really feel the spirit of this thing just by holding a raw oscillator down one note.
And repeating the same note as well.
Exactly.
You you just notice that, oh my God, this is like an acoustic instrument. When I repeat that same note again, it's different than the one before.
Absolutely true. Yeah, no, and the cycles of where the oscillators, I mean, all of these oscillators are free running. And so every articulation of the note is just opening up something that's living and always sustaining inside of this instrument, which I think is a really, really cool aspect of analog synthesizers, and something that just, the way we do things, really long sustained cycles and multiple round robins, and just really making sure that we're capturing the organic elements of this synth. I think that is totally, whether or not a listener is going to be able to say, yeah, like that synth had a lot of round robins. No, but you feel it, right? And you feel it in the production of the music that you're trying to create. And so if you have a sound designer who has specific contexts in mind and is creating sounds for the music, and then you capture that at the most organic level you possibly can with as much variation as you can, and then you give those tools to someone else who wants to create music in their own context, it's kind of the best, aside from owning the actual unit, it is the best representation of the ethos and the spirit of the Moog Model D. So I'm really, really excited to have this in Soundpaint.
So am I.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon like what we talked about earlier, like that's the Stradivarius component, because you're right. Like, we all know that sound, and whether it's John Williams' Star Wars Cantina scene or Herbie Hancock, whatever.
Man, it has been with us in our ear, in our spirit. If you love music and you love a certain genre of music, you are also falling in love with what was used to create that music, whether you realize it or not. And that can be identified as the specific musicians, the mixing techniques, the mastering techniques, the gear used, and the actual instruments themselves. Music is not a la carte. If you resonate with something, you're resonating with all of it, all of the aspects that went into the creation of that recording. And so I think the D is just such a staple across so many genres, so many eras, and has defined the sound for so many people, that it's just, there's a reason that it is sitting here and we're talking about it and we're trying to find a use for this in 2025, is because it's as relevant today as it was when it was created.
I mean, that's why there's a lot of myths surrounding Stradivarius. Like, was it the particular batch of wood from that era, the way it was cured, the way it was handled, the craftsmanship? Was it the pieces that it ended up being associated to, the different players throughout history? Whatever.
Yeah.
I know I keep coming back to this. I really see the same in this unit. I just think we just don't know it yet, but this thing will be around in 300 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just because of the popularity of the association, even though that's a big thing. I think there's a timeless nature underneath it. And for me, I'd be curious, like for you, if you were to put words to the sonic character of it, what would it be? What is it to you?
Yeah, to me, it's heart. Like it is a beating heart of a synthesizer. Like I think, there is warmth, there's activity, there's sustainability. A lot of things we associate.
Sustainability?
Yeah, of course.
What do you mean with that?
It sustains the music. I mean, like the way that it brings life to the tracks that it's used in and supports musical, artifacts that are on top of it, and gives, sustenance to the whole picture. It's absolutely the thing that's pumping the blood in the musical, in my opinion. You can drive a band with a Model D. You can warm up a track with a Model D. You can create suspense with a Model D. You can create aggression with a Model D. I mean, it is the heart. It is arguably the brain too of a musical track, because, it can influence mood so rapidly with just little tweaks here and there. And I just feel like, the reason we're talking about it, it's associative, but also, I mean, try and get away from the sound of a synthesizer in 2025 even. It's in every ad, film score, pop music. I mean, synths are everywhere. And if you're going for warmth, if you're going for a grisly tone, if you're going for kind of the core of what we like about synths, you're going to end up at a Model D eventually.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about like when you mention these things, like is like modern vintage or something, or retro future.
Yeah.
It's ironic for me because like I think we're talking about this earlier today. Like I keep coming back to it in Soundpaint as like it's my de facto bass synthesizer, and probably for leads as well.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting to you recorded pads as well.
Yeah.
That is almost too much being played polyphonic.
Right.
Like and I think that maybe there's something in the timeless nature of that as well. Like this is a monophonic instrument for a reason, though we can now try it polyphonically in Soundpaint. It is there's a simplistic nature to it.
I agree completely. And I think that the overarching theme here is it's a purpose-built instrument, but the purpose for this instrument is still being defined. And I really firmly believe that the most inspiring instruments and the ones that are the coolest to be in the presence of are the ones that continue to contribute sonically to music that hasn't even been created yet. And the way Moogs have been used over time continues to show why they are as revered as they are. And I mean, there is some certain aspect of it was kind of the first of its kind. I mean, this form factor, what you see here, influenced everything that came after it. And so not only is it an original instrument that's been, used for, decades, it also kind of laid out the blueprint for everything that came after it. And so when you're talking about what is the quintessential Stradivarius, whatever, as you said, like, I'm sure there are violin makers that looked specifically at certain aspects of how the Stradivarius was made and what, the shaping and what kinds of wood and all that stuff. Synthesizer makers have been doing that for the Model D for years. And, I think the fact that you have companies, Moog themselves reissuing these, modern rebuilds that are, supposedly as close as you can get, other companies, trying to mimic it, just tells you that people want to return home. People want to get back to the blueprint. They want to look at what made this so great and how they can use that in music today. And I think that's just the coolest thing. I mean, it's like, it'd almost be like if you went to a museum and looked at old artifacts from like really, really old cutlery or plates or, just things from years past. And, we're able to take it out and be like, I want to eat something with that today, something like that. And just basically say, this is from a time, it defined a time, but there's no reason that you can't use it today and have it still sound amazing. So it's a special, special thing. And it's really, really fun to work with.
I agree. I'm going to try to articulate something that I can't articulate because I think there's for me, at least there's a mystery regarding a few instruments that brings them into a different sphere in my mind, like the timelessness in it. You mentioned a variety of arguments for why that is, psychologically speaking. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to touch upon what happens when you use real electricity and complete analog components, different components than we even have available today.
Right.
I do think there's something about like forgive me for going back to this, but like the CS80, this guy, arguably even the DX7 was the first FM. Like those first synths, it's almost like I think a lot of great artists need to be a little bit naive when they're working at the cusp of what we know and what we don't know.
Right.
And that this is sort of like this came from somewhere else. Like most synths today are essentially just an iteration of this.
Yeah.
But this was not an iteration. Granted, you have modulars before, but it was a very new. It was iteration coming out of the ether, if you will.
I agree. And to be able to take something like that and create music that hasn't been created before is kind of in the spirit of it.
Yeah, and not just ended up with weird experimental sounds, which I think a lot of the modulars ended up with, and that's cool as well. But it didn't hit mainstream in the same way this one did. This one speaks.
Yeah, Moog was such a visionary, and I think if he could see the chain reaction, and he did to some degree, but if he could see the true chain reaction of creating this synthesizer as it sits here today, and where we are with some of the more modern releases. I think it would paint a really beautiful picture and a beautiful arc in terms of just being more practical, more affordable. But you do lose some magic when you start to kind of try to refine the process. And I feel like this is unrefined. This is absolute analog synthesis unrefined. And for me, as a synthesizer nerd, as someone who really values all those little, slight variances and just, really getting into what a Moog analog oscillator sounds like, it doesn't get better. It just does not get any better. And as I said when we started talking, simple in controls, but you're getting the best of every aspect, and I think that is just such a cool thing to have at your disposal in a modern context, in a modern program, captured this way.
Yeah,
it's cool.
It's
very cool. Yeah, it's like you can't help but smile and kind of have your eyes just absolutely, look over every little aspect of it. Like as I was dialing a sound and get the sampling going, I would just stare at it. And I would just really try and look at like, oh, this is like this almost looks like a piece of leather and maybe it is, I don't know what that is, but sometimes the logo, you can see like little bits of the paint, maybe it was stenciled on or something. And you're just like, you look over everything on a detail level and analyze how that got there, how this piece of wood got here, how these screws were hand screwed in and all this stuff. And I just don't think you can do that with a modern, kind of supply chain sort of synthesizer.
Oh, sure.
And so, there's a magic in that alone, just thinking about how many hands touched this synth in its creation, in its development, and then realizing that you are the last set of hands to touch it, and say, okay, now the onus is on me. It's just an inspirational mindset, and yeah, as I said, almost spiritual place to be sitting in front of it. So, I think the best art is created when you are inspired, and the instrument just being what it is inspirational. Just sitting here unplugged, I feel like I want to sink my whole self into it, and I really tried to do that with this library, and I hope that shows.
I think it does.
Awesome.
I mean, I felt that, like, I remember the very first time I turned it on, it was just like, I felt I was in the presence of something else as well. I felt exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's alive, like it has a brain or something.
Yeah.
Like it's.
And you're entering such a lineage of respected, revered, artistic creation when you take on an instrument like this. It's like picking up Picasso's paintbrush a little bit. Okay, this has been so beautifully used throughout time, across genres, across periods. What am I going to do with it?
I totally agree, man. I was at the Modern Museum the other day, looking at they have a couple of Rembrandt paintings.
Yeah.
And I never really knew a lot about Renaissance and all that, but like I went up to it and I'm like,
yeah,
the amount of detail, and you can see other contemporary painters for his time, they weren't at that level.
Yeah.
He had a thing about like being very precise with jewelry.
Right.
It's like pixel level precision. So imagine back then, like the margin for error is like,
yeah,
it's all analog, but like just appreciate like, and I feel this is a little bit the same. It's just like a level of life that we won't find in the digital world.
Completely agree. Yeah. Or will find, but only in a version where you're actually literally recording the actual unit. I certainly have never heard a piece of modern software or emulator have that same magic to it. And so, yeah, you're just left kind of in awe, kind of inspired, maybe a little bit intimidated. But at the same time, anytime you feel that intimidation, you just look at the simplicity of the controls.
Yeah.
And you say, all right, let me get in here. Let me see what makes this tick. What makes it sing.
But the Stradivarius as well is a little wooden box with 4 strings on it.
Yeah.
And I think like that there's a sauce underneath. And I don't think, from everyone I've known, including Dave, when people make innovation at this level, they are working at the ether of the abyss or emptiness or whatever that is. There's something more like for me. It's totally the same as the Stradivarius, and it's how I play it. I can make it into anything I want if I have the ability
or the vision, or if you this is one of those synths where you can hear the kind of sound you want to make, and getting into it, you'll ultimately create something even better than you were mentally hearing. That's something that I find with a lot of modern synths. Is I'll have a sound in mind and I'll be able to create that sound. That's great. But this is like, I have a sound in mind and I'm trying to get there. And then whatever I've created is better than what I was able to hear and say,
Yeah, that's
hey,
fucking cool.
yeah. And you can't say that about a lot of modern synthesizers. You definitely can't say that about VSTs. And for me, there's just an aspect of feeling the spirit of this sitting in front of me that really inspires me and gets me, you know, really revved up to create awesome sounds, and just starts thinking about, you know, what each individual aspect of it does and how it was created, and, you know, how this pot feels different from this pot. And, you know, if I just do that to the filter interfaces, what does that do to the sound? It's insane. And it's just such a beautiful thing to be a part of. So yeah, really, really fun. Yeah.
Thank you, man.